morning, and today I will present the paper Welfare and Generational Equity in Sustainable and Funded Pension Systems by Auerbach and Lee, which is a paper of 2009, which basically compared the performance of different pension systems in an environment characterized by uncertainty. Why do I choose this paper? Because the reform of pension systems is actually in the last year one of the most debated issue of the Italian political agenda, and so I get curious about this paper. So a brief overview. I will give you first an overview about different pension systems, and then I will lead you into the description of the different systems that the model compares. Then I will describe you the model used by the authors to compare the systems and some results, and then some conclusions of general interest. First of all, why public pensions? The most diffused justification for public pension is social insurance, so the state intervenes in order to ensure a certain level of income to elderly retirees, but there are also other justifications, and the most important one for our analysis is that the government intervenes in order to allocate and spread among generations the risk of economic and demographic shocks. So, the existing pension systems in the world may be classified according to two different criteria. First, the way in which contributions raised from workers are managed, and so we can distinguish between fully funded systems in which contributions raised are invested in a fund towards meeting future benefits, or the most diffused, the unfunded system, also known as pay-as-you-go, in which current worker contributions are used to directly pay out benefits to current retirees, so that no asset is set aside. Then we can distinguish the pension systems as regard the way in which benefits are calculated. So we have the defined benefit plan, which is actually the old Italian pension system, better known as retributivo, which is a system that guarantees a certain payout at retirement that usually depends on the salary earned by the worker. And then we have the defined contribution plan, which is the actual Italian system, also known as contributivo, which provides a payout at retirement that is directly connected to the amount of contribution that the worker gives to the state during the working life. So why are we talking about pension reforms? Because fiscal sustainability of pay-as-you-go system is threatened by population aging and also lower productivity growth trends, which affect the dependency ratio. And so defined benefits are no longer sustainable with the current tax rates, and so the system needs to be reformed. And the most followed path of reform has been moving from defined benefit plan to defined contribution plan. That is NDC, that is notional defined contribution systems. Notional defined contribution systems are still pay-go. So still there is no asset setting aside, and are based on two phases. And then the first phase, during the working life, each individual accumulates a virtual stock that is called notional pension wealth, and then at the retirement phase, this notional pension wealth is converted into annuities, and the annuity reflects both mortality conditions and is calculated on the basis of a given rate of return. Pay attention that the rate of return is chosen by the government, and this is the real policy choice, and is normally set equal to the growth rate of wages, which should make the system sustainable. So the starting point is that NDC systems are going to be fiscally stable, also because not only for their structure, but also because they provide some automatic adjustments, but the way in which fiscal stability is ensured, so the way in which automatic adjustment works, is going to influence risk spreading among generations. And risk spreading among generations in turn influence individual and social welfare. And so we want to compare the performance of different systems as regards risk sharing and welfare properties in facing different situations, so different economic and demographic shocks. Which systems are we going to compare? The system compared mainly differ as regards their adjustment mechanism. So the authors compare first the actual Swedish system, which is an NDC, and its adjustment mechanism is an asymmetric one, which means that it takes place only when the ratio between current contribution and current pensions liabilities falls below 1. It adjusts benefit downward, reducing the rate of return, but it takes place asymmetrically in the sense that instead when B falls above 1, benefits are not adjusted upward, and so some assets are accumulated. So the authors also provide some variants of the hypothetical variants of the actual Swedish system, which made the most important difference is that they provide a symmetric balancing mechanism, which means that benefits are adjusted not only downward but also upward when this ratio goes above 1. Then the German system, which differs from the Swedish one because it adjusts not only benefits but also taxes, so that the beneficiaries, the retirees, share the so-called pain or gain of fiscal adjustments with taxpayers. And then the authors provide 3 hypothetical variants of the US system, since the present one is not fiscally sustainable. 3 hypothetical variants in which they adjust taxes or benefits or both. How do they compare these systems? By building up a kind of complex model. They start by simulating some time series for fertility, mortality, rate of return and productivity growth in the long run. They fitted these functions over US historical data, and in this way they produce some 1,000 random sample paths, which are some hypothetical stochastic long-term demographic and economic forecasts, which allow them to see how the distribution of outcomes of interest vary in different hypothetical scenarios. And so these allow them to analyze the different performance of system in different hypothetical conditions. And here I provide an example of what the model does. Yeah, it's kind of complicated. So they produce these random paths, and this is, for example, how the ratio of retirees to workers vary across 15 sample paths for 500 years. Yeah, it's really tough. So, how we do compare the systems? They consider some comparison criteria. First of all, as regard risk sharing, they consider the net present value of expected lifetime contribution minus benefits, so the net present value of net benefits for each generation along each trajectory. That is a measure of pension program outcomes in the sense that it measures the impact of each pension system of each generation expected utility in case of risk-neutral preferences. This is kind of important, we will see why. And then we consider also the dispersion, so the variance of this value across different trajectories. That is a measure of how the different systems respond to the variation of conditions. Then, to analyze the impact of different systems of individual and social welfare, they analyze the variance, no more across trajectories, but among generation along each trajectory. That is a measure of the intergenerational equity in a fixed scenario. And then they do some estimates about expected utility, now taking into account that risk aversion matter and may vary during life. And then an aggregate measure of social welfare, in which they take into account the impact of different reforms on the transition generation. And this is really important. Why? Because we know that systems that adjust benefits normally are going to impose a burden of transition generation, and it's exactly what happened in Italy with the Riforma Fornero, the transition generation, in this case, avvii esodati. So let's have a look at the results. If we look at the NPV, we see that the Swedish actual system yields the lowest mean, but it also yields the lowest variance both across trajectories and across generations. And this makes sense because we see that there is kind of a trade-off between the mean and the variance. So the Swedish system ensures the highest stability, but at the cost of yielding the lowest level of net benefits. Then we see that the other system, as regards the MPV mean and variance, can be divided roughly into two groups. We have the three hypothetical variants of the NDC system that perform better, and then we see that instead that the system that adjusts taxes, like the US tax adjust and the German one, perform somewhat worse. And this because in this case we are still not taking into account transition generations. Then, as regards expected utility, we can see that now the NDC, the actual Swedish system, gained somewhat respect of before, because when risk matter, the Swedish system ensure a better smoothing of outcomes with respect to the other, but still the best performing are the symmetric hypothetical variants of the Swedish system, while the system that adjusts taxes are still performing worse. But the most important comparison to do is when we look at social welfare calculations, so when we take into account transition generation, because now the situation looks very different, because now the NDC Swedish system performs worse. The actual one performs worse because it places a strong burden over transition generation due to its symmetric balancing mechanism, while we see that the US 50-50 adjust both taxes and benefits. The German one have gained in some way because thanks to the fact that they share the burden of adjustment over more generations, so they reduce the impact of the adjustment over transition generations. But again, the best performing are the hypothetical symmetric variants of the NDC Sweden system. So, some conclusions. The most important thing to say is that we start with the aim to understand how NDC system can warrant a rate of return that is not influenced by economic and demographic environment. And what we see is that the assessment of the performance of the program has to take into account not only risk aversion, but most importantly the treatment of transition generations. So, when we take into account transition generation, the current Swedish system that seems to be the best performing in terms of stability results to be not so good as other systems, because the stability is provided thanks to the accumulation of some stocks, and these happen at the expense of transition generation that has to take the burden of this asset accumulation. Instead, the best performing system results to be the one which spread the risk widely among generations, and so the hypothetical symmetric variants of the Swedish system, the German one, and the US 50-50, which provide adjustment both on the side of taxes and on the side of benefits. So these results to be the best performing is because they manage to ensure both stability but also to improve welfare, taking also into account the welfare of transition generation. And my conclusive remark, my personal remark, is that this kind of system that adjusts both taxes and benefits are not so diffused because of high political cost of this kind of reform, because we know that adjustment of taxes normally affect current workers, which are also the median voters, and so it's better to pose the burden of adjustment of pensioners that are not so important in terms of political votes instead of workers. Thank you for your attention.